Okay, so I will go through the nodes that I've created as I follow the tutorial to create a fire from scratch. So here we are in the object level and we have several nodes right now, but the main three that we'll be looking at are these, the geo node, the .NET, and import, and I'll go through what each of them does. So this one is simply a sphere, and we can actually show that. So it's just a sphere, and this is acting as our source fuel. As we can see, as we go into this geometry node, it's just a simple sphere node that is then hooked up to a Pyro source, which is then used to create the fire for this entire simulation. And we use a volume rasterized attribute node to kind of get that fuel and temperature, and then we have a null node so that we can reference this in our network. So we named it out fuel because capitalized letters are more easy to find because they go at the top. So now that we have the fuel source and a way to reference that fuel source, we can now look into the network node, and in here there are several, let me zoom out here so we can see, there are several nodes here and the fire shows up. So here we have a smoke object, which is essentially the bulk of the visuals and whatnot. This is where we can change the colors and whatnot in the viewport, and I'll get into how it differs from the render. So yeah, so there's a lot of fields here, and this is what we will need to export out of the dot view and into SOP. So this is then connected to a Pyro solver along with a volume source, and this is how we reference that fuel source. So here, as we can see, that SOP path is out fuel, and we tell it that this is our source fuel. So we put the smoke object and this volume source that's referencing our out fuel into a Pyro solver, and this is where essentially all the magic happens pretty much. This is where we can change the behavior of the fire in terms of dissipation, disturbance, shedding, turbulence, and whatnot. And I played with these values a little bit just to make the fire look a little different from the default. Then that Pyro solver is then connected to a gravity node just to simulate normal gravity that we see here, and then it is then outputted. So that is everything in the .NET and in the DOP level and this .NET node. So now we're going to check out the import node, which is a geometry node, and here is just a DOP import field, which we reference our DOP network and the smoke object, because that is the information we wanted to take out of that DOP level and back into the SOPs so that we can put some shading and whatnot. So for that shading and kind of textures, we added some Pyro shading in the material view. So here we just have some flames, and this is where we can change how the fire will look in the render view. So if you remember in the DOP view, the fire looks orange and yellow, but I wanted to play around with the colors and kind of see how the viewport and the render differ. So let me get back to the mat so I can show you. So I changed the colors to blue actually for the, instead of deep orange, so that when we render it, it will have that blue fire. And so if we wanted to change the look of it, we would have to go into this material, which is applied onto our simulation, as opposed to the smoke object where you change the color of the flame in just the viewport, not the render. So this is how I rendered a blue flame, even though we see an orange flame in the scene view. So now we have these two other nodes. This is simply just for rendering. So we have a camera and a spotlight, and this is how I rendered the frame that was included in my submission. That is all. The main changes between the tutorial video and this one is that, I think if we go down in here, very minor ones, this volume source node was actually called source volume before. Still works pretty much the same, except there was one field missing that was mentioned in the tutorial, which was scale temperature. It used to be just here at the top, but it's not here anymore, so that was moved since that Houdini version. Besides that, everything else is pretty much the same. So thank you for listening.